The bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki have long been a very touchy subject for me. I remember when the full gravity of what really happened there hit me, and I did not take it well. It was sometime around 2013, and I was in history class in school. I had previously heard about the bombings, but I had only gotten very broad strokes information on it, simply hearing that there were a couple of huge bombs dropped on Japan, and that they caused a lot of destruction. That day, though, the lecture I heard delved into the moment of the bomb's impact and the experience that the people of Japan went through in its immediate aftermath. I heard the story of two young girls, sisters, who were relatively close to the bomb when it blew up. They were inside a building, so they didn't take the full impact of the blast, but it may have been better if they had. The building shielded them from immediate death, but it didn't save them from being exposed to incredible amounts of heat, enough to mutilate them, leaving them unrecognizably burned and on the verge of dying. I remember hearing the story told from the perspective of one of the sisters, how she was digging through the rubble of the building and found her sister's hand, but when she went to grab it, she felt that it was melting. She talked about seeing her sister's permanently disfigured face and the fear that coursed through her as she walked through her destroyed hometown, having no idea what was going on. When I heard this story, I actually got up, left the classroom, and then cried in the hallway. I remember saying to my friend that I just couldn't believe that people would do something like that to each other. At the time, it was probably the worst thing I had ever heard. Since that day, my interest in nuclear weapons has remained high, as evidenced by my recent review of the movie Threads, which you should check out. Fast forward to today, and I have just seen the new Oppenheimer movie starring Cillian Murphy, and I've added it to my ever-growing list of nuclear war movies that I think are worth watching. In this video, I'm not going to be gushing about the cinematography or the acting in this film, as wonderful as they are. This video is more about exploring the moral dilemma of dropping the bombs on Japan and how this movie got me thinking about that in new ways. Keep in mind that this is a very personal video for me, so it's going to be coming solely from my own perspective. I've always been interested in World War II and nuclear war, but I am by no means an expert, and my research while making this video was very, very minimal. Take this video for what it is. A simple human being thinking out loud. One question that always comes to mind when I think about the nuclear bombing of Japan is whether or not it was justified. And as an American, I almost feel like I have a responsibility to think about it. I mean, sure, we were at war with Japan, and they did side with the Nazis of all people, so there are certainly arguments to be made for the bombing being justified. There are several things that stop this from being an easy question to answer for me, though. First of all, I have never experienced total war, or really any war. We as humans are living in the longest stretch of relative peace that mankind has ever known, and that has been true for my whole life. I don't know what I would do if my country's well-being was at stake. I like to think that I would never, ever drop an atomic bomb anywhere, but there's a little part of me that reminds myself that I don't truly understand what it meant to make that decision. I've heard the justifications. I've heard that the alternative to dropping the bombs would have meant a land invasion, which would have theoretically led to the loss of more American and Japanese lives than were lost in the blasts. I've heard that we had to drop the bombs, and that we had to drop them on a city so that the Japanese would see what the bombs were capable of. After all, why would they surrender if all we did was tell them about the destructive potential the bombs had? Someone I know brought up a good point, that if her husband had been a soldier in World War II and he would have had to be part of the land invasion of Japan, that she might have been in favor of dropping the bombs simply for personal reasons. All of these reasons honestly make sense to me, but that in and of itself is kind of a problem for me. I like to think to myself that I would never give the go-ahead for something so awful, but at the same time I have to admit that given all the information at the time, it might have been justified to drop the bombs. Who am I to condemn the people who made the call? So much of me wants to condemn them, to call them devils for what they did, for melting the skin off of unsuspecting civilians and wiping hundreds of thousands of people off the planet. But I simply feel that I don't have the moral authority to do so. I wasn't there. I don't know if it was the right choice or not. This conflict creates such a weird, awful feeling in my head, as well as in my heart. How can I say that these bombs dropping was one of the worst things to ever happen, but also be on the fence as to whether it was right? What kind of monster am I? Well, that is one question I do have an answer to. I'm a human. That's what kind of monster I am. It makes me sick to my stomach to think about the fact that the people who dropped those bombs and I are the same kind of monster. We all have evil within us, and there are certain times when that evil cannot be ignored. It makes me wonder what it even means to be moral and what it means to live in this world. I mean, is it really possible for there to be a situation in this world in which dropping a bomb that kills hundreds of thousands of people is the right thing to do? What kind of world is this? How can something so awful ever be the right thing to do? Now, it's probably clear by this point that I won't be taking an official stance on whether it was right. My stance is that I don't know, and I truly don't think I ever will know. But it's the moral quandary in my head that keeps me wondering. I even feel a little guilty for not being able to answer, that I'm privileged to be able to think about this question in a time of peace, a time in which the question is hard to answer because I'm not in that situation. Oppenheimer as a movie does a great job of encapsulating this feeling I have in my head, and it does so through Oppenheimer himself. As the father of the atom bomb, I'm sure there aren't many other people who felt so closely connected to this moral quandary as he did, apart from the scientists who helped him and perhaps the crew that actually dropped the bombs. 3 scenes from the film come to mind right now that really bring this point home. The scene where we see the bombs being transported from Los Alamos, no longer in the control of the scientists and now in the hands of the US government, highlighting the feeling in Oppenheimer that he has started something that he can't stop. And then there's the scene of Oppenheimer giving his speech in front of that crowd and him imagining them being burnt alive, just as he has enabled the US government to do to the people of Japan. And then there's the final scene, the one that finally shows us what Oppenheimer said to Einstein next to the pond. He tells him that he believes that he and the other scientists have started a chain reaction that will destroy the world, and honestly, he may be right. There are enough nuclear weapons in the world today to destroy all of us many times over, and for all we know, they could go off tomorrow. Or today. It's not likely, given the idea of mutually assured destruction and all, but it could happen, and that's terrifying. Still, I can't end this video without first expanding on something I mentioned earlier. The bombings of Japan and the subsequent nuclear arms race has led to the longest stretch of relative peace that mankind has ever known. The threat of mutually assured destruction has led to a world in which nobody wants to start too large of a conflict lest they set off a nuclear war, with one notable exception being Vladimir Putin and his invasion of Ukraine. Still, even that hasn't led to a nuclear war yet, and I think that we ironically have nuclear weapons to thank for that. I ask you this though, was it worth it? Was melting all of those people worth the peace we have now? Do we really live in a world in which peace can only be won through violence? Perhaps we do. Perhaps that's just something that I need to accept. Perhaps someday I will, but for now I remain in moral conflict, bouncing around in my head as to whether it was truly right what my country did that day in 1945. I honestly think that, at least for now, I'd rather be undecided than pick either side of this terrible event and the horrifying moral quandary that it poses. Thank you for watching this video. If you haven't seen Oppenheimer, I really think you should go see it. And please check out my other videos. Like I said, I have a review of Threads, which was made in 1984. It's like some people say alternate history, some people say like, I don't know, just like a what-if movie. It's a what-if movie about if, during the Cold War, a nuclear bomb had been dropped on England. I think it's a really good movie, and I did like a full 20-something minute review of it. And I also have other movie reviews that would be great if you checked out. But this channel isn't a movie review channel. I just upload whatever I want, so feel free to check out the other stuff too. And please subscribe and give a like. Thanks for being here, I appreciate it, and tune in next time on The Alec Powers.